Illuvium needs millions of players for it to survive and produce the dozens of new titles the wide variety of gamers crave for. And this is the game right here. Now, although it looks really pretty and it does some things really, really well, it has a series of huge problems, and I'm going to explain the 10 big fixes that they can make to the game that will make it one of the best gaming experiences there is in Web3 and even competing and rivaling with many Web2 titles. And yes, I'm going to be discussing Palworld a little bit into this video. Its more obvious problems fall into 3 categories: monetization, gameplay, and social elements. Okay, I will cover these 3 aspects and the 10 changes that Illuvium has to make before they launch their open beta, in my personal opinion. I must also mention that Palworld has directly inspired the urgency for some of these changes, and it cannot be ignored. In my opinion, it is a good testimony of how important engaging and fun gameplay is for any kind of game, Web3 or Web2, and they really don't exist in Web3 just yet. I know many of you are going to disagree with me, but I've played many of them, and besides Shardbound and Illuvium, are definitely a whole lot of fun, but they are far from finished and far from highly replayable. Okay, the first change I must talk about is Illuvial's roaming in the overworld. As you can see right here, it looks very barren and very empty. There is nothing in sight. Okay, this makes the most important factor of this is that it makes the overworld feel like the same exact experience every time you go into it, which is not the same feeling you get in many other creature collecting games and many other AAA games in general. Okay, Illuvials roaming around for you to see in their own natural habitat, even if they're not doing much at first, would make this entire space feel so much more alive and feel like every time you enter, you don't know what you're going to find. Currently, you still technically don't know what you're going to find, but like you can see here, you shoot those little wake things and then you see what Illuvials are inside them, rather than seeing an atlas walking across and going, cool, there's an atlas here. You know, it's a very disconnected way of playing out this type of genre. Okay? It also allows you to hunt for specific things rather than shooting, waiting, scanning, waiting, and then battling the Illuvial. Okay? And it can also change up the difficulty and increase it in the overworld. What I mean by that is if you find a Titanor, it's going to be really hard to capture, shoot, battle, whatever it might be. Whereas if you find an Atlas, it might be really easy for you to tame and capture, which I think is going to be a really important aspect for making the overworld more engaging, unlike how it is right now. The other thing I want to talk about is encouraging exploration. Currently, we have the heat map. Okay, the heat map is not enough, all right? I cannot stress this enough. Even though the heat map shows you where all the resources are and all the alluvials and all the rest of it, it doesn't really force you to go, I want to go explore this area for something quite specific, for a quest or otherwise. And my suggestion for this would be maybe alluvials appear on your radar, forcing you to go find them. It says like, Atlas is nearby if you head in this direction. That sort of navigation would be really interesting where you're actually trying to hunt something and track something rather than just walking around aimlessly or setting a marker on a map. It would make the game feel a lot more interesting, that's for sure. You could also place powerful things like a ramfire in unusual places, perched on top of a thing, but it's only one in every 100 times and you will only know it's there when it appears on your map. And you will need certain equipment and things to be able to go up to it and fight that ramfire. These sorts of things would be really interesting. The next thing that is an issue in Illuvium, the third one, is monetization should feel hidden. Now, obviously we don't have spending money in the game just yet, but from what I understand, I don't think it's going to be hidden enough. People have no trouble paying for a gift card from GameStop. I used to work at EB Games in Australia, and trust me, there are a lot of mums that will come in and drop $100 on a Steam gift card for their kid for Christmas or whatever else, okay? There's a lot of money floating around in these sorts of microtransaction type areas, okay? But they cannot be forced to go to the shops every day. The mum is going to drop $100 on that gift card once every 2 or 3 months. They're not going to go back over and over and over again. And overworld travel needs to feel like an entire experience. It cannot be, I went into the overworld and I spent this money and I came out, I didn't really feel like I did anything. I didn't feel like I finished playing the game in any sort of way. That needs to change. If they have to re-enter the overworld too often, they may have to slow down their experience to buy more fuel, which can be a really abrasive gameplay mechanic for Illuvium as a whole. Subscription-based services could also help, where they pay a set amount a month and they get that fuel, and we have set up the game in such a way that we expect that amount of fuel to last them the entire month. It's a really powerful revenue tactic that could work really well in Illuvium's favor. If you want to pay extra, be my guest. This is a little bit reminiscent of a battle pass, but not quite. I think this would be really, really beneficial to the game. I cannot stress that enough, okay? The next thing is that, and I know this one's going to be really controversial. This is number 4. The arena needs to be secondary to the core gameplay loop. Let me say that again. The arena needs to be secondary to the core gameplay loop. The arena is fantastic as a game offering in its own right for the competitive scene of Illuvium and whatever else it might be, but having to go into a wake and fight all of these Illuvials in an auto battler style game and then coming back out with makes it just so much harder to engage with the Illuvials, harder to engage with the game. Now, it might really benefit some, and I love how interesting the auto battler is as a whole, but I'm not convinced it serves its purpose here in the overworld, not in the long term at least. It's definitely fine as an intermediary, but it slows down the gameplay so much that this needs to be improved in one way or another. Eventually it needs to be removed from the overworld, or there needs to be a second kind of overworld that doesn't use the auto battler. A different style game entirely. I don't know what it is, but yeah. Number 5 is there needs to be less breaks in momentum. Okay, as you can see here, them flying around, and that's all great, and there aren't many rocks to mine, which bugs me a little bit. Shooting the wakes is not really a break in momentum either, but things like mining the rocks is way too much, and they are too far apart. It needs to feel wholesome, it needs to feel complete, and that also goes in hand with when you enter the overworld, you need to be there for hours exploring every nook and cranny, because that's what makes sense, and that makes it feel like an entire experience rather than you just have to go in, come out, go in, come out. It doesn't make so much sense, okay? And the other thing with mining rocks and hitting wakes and things like that, once you've seen it once, you have seen it 100 times, okay? You need to make them more dynamic. I think Illuvials roaming the overworld and at least shooting them and then turning into wakes is already a lot more dynamic, but it needs some level of diversity that makes it feel like you're doing something different. For every 5 runs you do, they're not the same. And then maybe it starts repeating a little bit, and then you've got the 7 regions, and then you've got 35 individual experiences any player can experience that they'll really only do once. I think that'll be good. I'll talk about that a little bit more later as well. Number 6 is that there needs to be less aimless gameplay. Okay, there needs to be a clear objective at all times. I know a lot of people need that hand holding when they play these sorts of games. Soulbound rewards could be used as dangling carrots. Say, capture 10 fleesh, and then if you do it, you get some really cool fleesh weapon skin or armor skin or something. I don't know what it looks like. Obviously, I don't want to overlap with Illuvium 0, but there needs to be a clear objective that's something for you to strive for. And leading on to that with number 7, is better player progression. Okay, I know this is going to sound a little bit weird, but currently every single thing in this game is tied to NFTs. That's great. But you also need player progression. This is something that Power World did really well with their base leveling. We don't need bases in Illuvium, although having a base in Sanctum Mesa would actually be really, really cool. We don't need that. If you capture an Illuvial, maybe you get a little bit of experience points, and now you're on this really cool leaderboard that's like you're a ranger level 100. And at level 100, you get like a really cool soulbound ranger cosmetic item. It might not look as cool as some of the paid ones or whatever it might be, but it still looks cool all the same and shows you the sort of ranger you are and how much you've played the game and really how many Illuvials you've caught. We don't really have that yet. We don't have a reason for you to play on the one account or really go out and try and hunt all the Illuvials yourselves. These sorts of player progression metrics could be really cool and they're great for people to strive for. The next thing is cooperative adventuring, okay? So I don't think we necessarily have to have co-op in the overworld, but I can understand, especially after playing Power World, just how valuable it could be. Firstly, it is very hard to incorporate, so there's no rush on this, but sometime in 2024 would be epic. And you are also likely to share resources, which I think would feel a little bit weird. Imagine you jump in with 4 of your friends and all of the different ores are all around, but you can only mine them once. And so you're all trying to fight over the same resources. You would have to deal with that in some way. It might be a bit awkward. However, eventually for things like raid bosses and adventuring in new unknown territories, or trying to hunt down the same alluvial in a competition style setting, these could be really cool and make for really memorable moments as well. I definitely think cooperative features in Illuvium will be valuable, but there needs to be done in the right way, and I'm not convinced we have systems to enable it just yet without some sort of raid boss or dungeon system. The next one I've got for you is player versus player elements. Now, I don't mean you go around and you shoot other players in the overworld, although that would be pretty sick, but competing against an opponent and stealing their potential resource harvests could make this game completely different. Like, think about it. You're roaming around this land and there's 10 other players roaming around as well, and every rock that's mined is mined once, okay? Think about it this way. What if all those rocks had 10 times better resources in them? Yeah, let's think about that. What if they had 10 times better resources in them, and then you could all mine them only once? That would mean that you really want to compete against these players. You want to knock them out. You want to take them out of the game. You want to get all the resources. You're going to get way better resources out of the game, and those other players are going to lose out. And it makes for a really interesting PvP experience and forces you to outplay your opponents. And this would just make the replayability of the game go way up, which brings me to my 10th topic right now. Frequent replayability hacks. Currently, the overworld has like no replayability. The arena does pretty well in the fact that you can go in and play other players, rank up on the leaderboard, all the rest of it. Illuvium overworld doesn't really have that. And these other 9 points on my list actually mostly draw themselves towards this replayability side of the game that is missing right now in the overworld. The exploration gets stale really quickly because you aren't forced to adapt to new things and you're going through the same locations every single time. Enemies in the overworld wouldn't necessarily fix this, because even though you're dodging maybe a plant from attacking you, you do that same dodge every single time you enter the overworld. It needs random alluvial events, things like a flock of fern flying around, or a sprinting titanor that's nearly impossible to catch and only appears 1 in every 100 runs. And if alluvials can fight you, it'll also help as well. For example, if an atlas can shoot water at you or put up a shield, or if a fiery can start shooting fireballs at you as you're running around the overworld, it would break up the monotony and make it a whole lot more dynamic. I hope you guys appreciated the video. I hope you like my advice, or even if you didn't, I hope you take something away from it and leave a comment down below what you think the overworld needs the most to improve and become a more engaging, dynamic, and entertaining experience. And with that, I will leave you off. Don't forget to hit my link down below if you have not checked out Illuvium yet, if you want to check it out, if you want to get involved. Also, if you need a beta key for the overworld in particular, you can ask in the Discord. Click the link down below. It helps me so much. You have no idea. Have a good day.